I totally agree with Glen's observation that I came over here and had no idea how well developed the work in Australia is. And I know that sometimes when you're a prophet is never a prophet close to home, but you ought to realize that you're not just doing great work here in Australia, you are really leaders in the world. And so acknowledge yourselves, as Glen said. I'm going to be looking today then at the two most vulnerable parts of the family, boys and fathers, and also recognizing that there's no way we can have decent relationships. Women don't fall in love with boys who are, with men who are adrift, with men who have no sense of purpose, with men who have no sense of mission, and with men who don't have their act together. And so if you don't have boys doing well, you don't have women marrying those young men, and you don't have, therefore you have children, a family without fathers, and you continue that cycle throughout generations. And that's what we're really dealing with today. And so I'll be looking at first an overview. I'll look at some of the evidence of why there really is a major boy crisis, why that boy crisis exists in all the industrialized world, that the industrialized world has in common, that success allowed there to be divorces, and divorces allowed there to be the options of people going separate ways, and then that led to children not having their fathers involved to a much greater degree all around the world. And so wherever we see this, we see a boy crisis. We'll look also then both at the evidence and then at causes and solutions. I'll be looking at, as the evidence, I'll look at education with you, why boys' IQs, or the evidence of boys' IQs dropping, careers and jobs, what's happening, physical health, what's happening there, mental health. We'll be looking at the 10 major, I'll only be able to share today with you a few, the first 3 of the 10 causes of the boy crisis, but I want to give you a sense that we're going to be dealing only with 3 of 10, and so here's the larger picture of what the 10 are. I'll be dealing first with the purpose void, secondly with video game addiction, third with fatherlessness, fourth with plastics and pollutants. I will not have a chance to deal with that, but I'll be happy to answer questions about that. ADHD and why the approach that we're taking today to ADHD is not an effective one. I'll be dealing with low HI, which I would call health intelligence, which is both physical health and mental health and just social emotional skills. Number 7, career transition from muscle to mental, why the entire economy worldwide is changing from jobs that were boy-friendly to jobs that are much more female-friendly or at least neutral. Looking at the perfect storm between sex, women, and porn. I began a little bit of that process yesterday in response to the question about sexuality. Number 9 is the disconnect between our sons and our schools. That disconnect is enormous and much more subtle than has been pointed out before. And then the self-fulfilling area of girls rule and boys drool, and why that is creating a major self-esteem problem among boys. So we're at the point now where we are looking at the issue of, let me just not distract you for a moment there. We're at the point now where publications like The Atlantic and New York Times Magazine are writing articles like that are called The End of Men. And there's a lot of good evidence to make that point. But if our sons see the end of men as their future, they'll basically have little inspiration for life's journey. And yet, when we talk to teachers and we talk to parents, in fact, we see an enormous lack of motivation among boys, what might be called a failure to launch. And that, of course, does create and reflects little inspiration for life's journey. So let's look at some of the evidence behind that. The consequences of that, before I get into the evidence, the consequences are enormous because males constitute our most constructive energy and our most destructive energy. In the most constructive energy, we tend to be the inventors, we tend to be the CEOs. Our most destructive energy, we tend to be the prisoners, we tend to be the serial killers. If we don't focus on working effectively with our sons, we are talking about a major release of destructive energy. This is, for the first time in American history, what I will do is I'll give some data. I always talk about what I know best, try to avoid things that I haven't researched as well. So because the boy crisis is a worldwide crisis, I'll be looking at some of the US data that I know best. I'll ask at the end for you to add some Australian data that you know best. But I will say that to the degree that I have research data worldwide, it's amazing how in industrialized countries there are very similar findings. For the first time in American history, our sons will have less education than their dads. If you have really good eyes, you'll see that Australia is number 13. Australia will have 6% more of our sons graduating from college than their fathers did. So at least you're not down there where the United States is at the bottom. We're 31 out of 31. You can look at, in looking at the differences in college degrees, what you see here is 61% it was in 1970 or so, 69, 61% of the people that graduated from college were males. Now it's projected that in 2019 that's going to be 39%. So the male and the female trajectory have gone in totally different ways. And yet we're still giving scholarships predominantly, at least in the United States, to girls and to women with the thought that they are the minority group that needs the extra help and not paying attention equally to the boys and to men. One of the amazing things is that boys' IQs have dropped about 15 points since the 1980s. And this is more surprising than it appears because from generation to generation, IQs usually increase. That is true with girls, but with boys, the opposite has happened. Boys who are nearly 12 years old today are doing only as well as 8 to 9-year-olds in the 70s. And girls don't have a history of liking boys who don't perform. And so this boys are stupid, throw rocks at them is not just an isolated book. It's an entire industry that has done extremely well selling sweatshirts and T-shirts and baseball caps and doing videos and so on, all focused on the theme, boys are stupid, throw rocks at them. From a mental health perspective, we, as boys and girls are at the age of 9, girls and boys' suicide rates are the same. But from age 10 to 14, boys' suicide rate becomes twice as high as girls. From 15 to 19, 4 times as high. From 20 to 24, more than 5 times, almost 6 times as high as girls. A CBS investigation found that more U.S. military were killed by suicide in 1 year than were killed in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan in all years combined. Many of you caught a little bit of what I said yesterday about boys. When I wrote The Myth of Male Power, I subtitled it, Why Men Are the Disposable Sex. And disposability is not only a fact, it's a mindset of not taking care of the boys and men who sacrifice themselves once they've done their job of risking their lives. In 1920, American boys and men lived, in terms of physical health, American boys and men lived just 1 year less than women. American boys and men today live 5 fewer years. And so in just 90 years, the male-female life expectancy gap has grown 400%. Boys today, in terms of physical health again, have sperm counts that are less than half of what their grandfathers had at their age. Looking at the issue worldwide, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, found that girls now outperform boys in overall educational markers in all 35 of the most developed countries. That includes Australia, England, US, Canada, Germany, France, and Japan. Let's look at some of the 3 of the causes of the boy crisis that I'll have a chance to focus on. One is the purpose void. I mentioned a second ago that virtually every society that survived did so by preparing its sons to be disposable. Disposable in war or disposable in work, and because many of our sons who die in war or work are dads, disposable as dads. The good news is that fewer men are needed as heroes today to die in war. And being a sole breadwinner no longer defines masculinity as it used to. That's the good news. The bad news is that disposability used to be a source of purpose. You'd go to war and you'd become a hero. So you had a mission, you had a purpose, you had dragons to kill. But disposability as purpose is being replaced for boys with no purpose. In contrast, when women lost their sense of purpose as homemakers and moms only, the women's movement sold them careers as an alternative sense of purpose, and then also made it legal and worked with laws and socialization and school systems at every dimension of society to inspire girls to have an alternative sense of purpose that would be relevant to the industrialized revolution. As a solution, developing new senses of purpose for our boys has to be part of every rite of passage, I believe, being a dad as a new sense of purpose, working in what's now called women's professions, being tech warriors like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, inventors of better forms of communication. As I mentioned yesterday, if we are not going to be the sole breadwinners and we are not going to be the heroes, we have to have other things that we contribute to the family. And one of those things that we can contribute to the family is really knowing how to listen, knowing how to be effective in our communication, knowing how to have emotional intelligence rather than just technological intelligence. Although technological intelligence, believe me, as I'm doing this, is very helpful. Cause number 2, video game addiction. The problem, I want to make it clear, is not video games. The problem is our video game addiction. Just for anyone that's into video games, the data now shows us that video games are conducive to, they can be made so they're conducive to uniting the family. They can create friendships. They can be helpful for careers. They can develop spatial skills. They can develop increase ability to make good decisions. They can increase brain functions. And almost all playing of video games reduces stress. So the problem is not video games. The problem is video game addiction. If I were to compare video games to one thing, it would be to red wine. Some people can't touch red wine without becoming addicted. Other people can do it in moderation, and it ends up being healthy for them. And everybody, once it becomes too much for them, based on their level of handling it, become addicted, and that's the problem. And here is the problem with boys versus girls. Teenage boys use video games an average of 13 hours a week. Teenage girls use them an average of 5 hours a week. And this doesn't include the viewing of pornography, the watching of sports on a mobile device. It's just video games. It's when you get to the 13-hour per week level that you move into probable addiction for many boys. Brain images of boys playing video games find the games can affect the brain once it moves to the addiction level in a way that's similar to cocaine, Ritalin, Adderall, and Concerta. And all of those drugs operate a lot like cocaine on the brain. The key issue is that there's 2 parts of the brain that are really impacted by video games. One, and video games motivate you, as I'll explain in a moment, to win at the game. But they don't motivate you to win at life, and here's why. Here's the brain part of the brain that's relevant. There's the nucleus accumbens, which is right there. And the nucleus accumbens is what gets filled up, blood, when you're playing a video game, blood engorges in the nucleus accumbens, and dopamine increases, motivating you to win at the actual video game. But what happens is that blood is prevented from going into the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is what is necessary to translate motivation into real life skills. So a boy who's really good at playing NFL Madden football will be usually unable to play football itself. He just is a winner at the game of football, but he doesn't even necessarily know how to throw a football. And there's an enormous inverse relationship between success in the game and success at life. This is not true at the 5, 6, 7 hour a week level. It is true at the addiction level. So that's why the issue is not video games, but video game addiction. By the age of 21, boys average 14,000 hours of gaming. It only takes about a third of that time to get a bachelor's degree. A bachelor's degree takes about 4,800 hours, including homework. The solution is video games in moderation, basically. And the solution to video games in moderation is parental boundary enforcement. One of the single most important contributions of fathers is boundary enforcement. Not boundary setting, mothers are more likely to do that, but boundary enforcement. So let's get into cause number 3, fatherlessness. Here's on the Dallas area, rapid transit, that's public transit in Dallas, Texas. This is a billboard that was featured there. One day, my husband will kill me. Observe, it doesn't say one day my husband might kill me. It says one day my husband will kill me. Understand that this billboard was being paid for by public monies. Another billboard, dart number 2, when I grow up, I will beat my wife. Now let's take a look at this for a moment. This is the image of boys who have the potential for becoming fathers. Imagine taking your daughter or son for a walk in Dallas and seeing a billboard like this. Your son is 6, 7, or 8 years of age. There's a lot of subtle things in this billboard. For example, the billboard features a white boy. Why a white boy, even though the girl is African American? Consider, for example, a black boy saying, when I grow up, I'll beat my wife. Immediately, if we saw that with a black boy, the focus would be on the racism. The racism of showing a black boy saying, I will beat my wife, would have been so apparent, but yet we're blind to the misandry, so blind to the misandry that few people even know that the word misandry means hate men, the hatred of men, just like misogyny means the hatred of women. We're so blind to the misandry that multiple layers of city employees in Dallas either unconsciously approved, distributed, and hung these billboards, or consciously approved of using city funding to help finance this. In effect, the spreading of negative feelings about our sons, not as a potential perpetrator, but as an inevitable perpetrator. When I grow up, I will beat my wife, is taxpayer-supported misandry. What's powerful for me is not the existence of these billboards, but what's powerful is the multiple layers of public employees that did not question this before this got to the billboard level on buses, where literally millions of people were calculated to have seen these billboards. Let's look at what's missing when dad's missing. The most important thing is as we've been talking about here, is what I call a dad-rich family. And I'd like us to think of a family that has a dad involved in it, as being dad-rich. So we begin to introduce into our vocabulary that what we as men produce is not money that makes the family rich, but rather our emotional connection with the family that makes a family dad-rich. The more dad-rich a family is, the better a child does in more than 30 areas of measurement. Those areas are social, psychological, physical health, and academic. The most important factor by far in preventing drug use is a close relationship with dad. When studies were done, a meta-analysis of all the major studies on dads in non-intact families spending more time with their children versus having more money to give to their children and families, it was found that in a non-intact family, time with dad helps a child's well-being more than money from dad. Boys who live with their fathers after divorce tend to be warmer, counterintuitive. We usually think of mothers as being warmer, and mothers probably are warmer, but that doesn't mean that the children are warmer. Have a higher degree of self-esteem, be more mature, and be more independent than boys who don't. Worldwide, the amount of time a father spends with a child is one of the strongest predictors of empathy in adulthood. Any one of these items that I just mentioned and the other 30 major areas of measurement have enormous implications for our future. But just think about empathy in relation to what the topic here is today of family relationships. Have you ever heard someone say, "I want a divorce. My partner understands me"? One issue, just being understood. I mean, we don't divorce our dogs, they understand us, or at least they don't question us. But just the feeling that we're being empathized with and not criticized or controlled and so on is probably a single most powerful thing. And the United States is an enormous litigious culture, but very seldom does anybody sue anybody else from whom they feel empathy or sue anybody toward whom they feel empathy. This, what I'm suggesting, really would put an enormous amount of lawyers out of work. Looking at the issue of why fathers can create a new male sense of purpose. In the past, boys fulfilled their sense of purpose and mission via careers that lasted a lifetime. In the future, careers will rarely last a lifetime. It is preparing our son to be a dad that will give him a sense of purpose for a lifetime. However, boys will not be inspired to pursue the option of being a great father in a culture of father absence. Desire to be a father begins in the son, who sees in his own dad who he could become. We have, though, a culture of father absence. For the first time in U.S. history, and I understand the data is fairly similar in Australia, more than 50% of children born to mothers under 30 were born outside marriage. When a child is born to a mother a mother who is not married, very rarely does that child have a lot of access to the father. What access she or he does have to the father tends to be conditional on the mother believing that the father is behaving the way she believes a father should father. And so therefore, the relationship of the father to the mother becomes hierarchical in a family where there's no, where the child is born outside of marriage. The father has to sort of is an advisor to the mother. He has to have permission from the mother, and the mother judges and gatekeeps what the father is doing. So therefore, there isn't what is really needed in the family. The families that do best have a checks and balances where there's often tension between the mother and the father. The mother says, no, the child shouldn't climb the tree. The father says it's okay to climb the tree. And the argument about whether the child can climb the tree or not leads to the child climbing fewer portions of that tree, and yet being able to climb that tree and being watched out more carefully. So the protection from the mother and the encouragement of risk-taking for the father is much more likely to occur when the father and the mother have an equal balance of power and equal checks and balances with each other. One out of every 3 children in America lives in father-absent homes. That's 24 million American children living without a dad. Take a look at this part here. This is the increase of just since the 1980-something, or about 1990. It was 34% of women who were under 30 had children outside of marriage. Today it's 53%. of all women, including women over 30. It went from 4% in 1940 to 41% today, or a few years ago. Two examples of the next an important question is, what is the uniqueness of a dad's contributions? There are so many areas that dads, one of the real problems with fathers and mothers and fathers not being more involved is that dads do not know what we do that contributes to the family. We don't read books on it, we don't study it, we don't make it a part of our life learning experience. And so therefore it's impossible for us to, if we don't know what we contribute, it's impossible for us to talk to moms about the value of our contribution. And women can't be blamed for not hearing what men don't say. So we have to take the primary responsibility of educating ourselves to communicate about not just what we do, but the value of what we do. So, for example, roughhousing, coaching, and play, which fathers tend to do, create a bond of dad and child against the other team. Thank you. The child becomes receptive to criticism from the dad because the child perceives the dad as helping him or her become a winner against the adversary. Without that bond, the mother and the teacher not having that bond, but often teaching directly, but not having done the play, not having created the excitement, not having done the roughhousing, don't have that bond. And so oftentimes the child's relationship to a teacher becomes more rebellious. The child's relationship to the mother becomes more manipulative and coercive. But the child doesn't want to lose the bond of that play and that roughhousing and that chasing each other, where the father has often created in the process of coaching. We see this in the most successful school that has been set up in the United States that I'm aware of, in Bedford-Stuy, one of the poorest communities in the United States. A teacher named Jay Nondal, he became a principal, started a charter school. The first 3 hours of that charter school were focused on sports, and 3 hours for troubled children, sports were the focus. Those children went from 0% likelihood of going to college to 95% went to college. But it's not just because of the sports starting the day, it was because the coach stayed with the child and tapped in with the child all day long. The connection between that and fathers is, we don't just need fathers to be visitors there occasionally, we need fathers to be involved with their children all the time. That the coaching has to be, you have to move from the leverage that you create with the bond with the child and use that leverage to continue to be involved with the children. So when mothers and fathers are divorced, they need to live close to each other so the father and the mother can both be involved and continue that coaching with the child. But especially the father involvement is crucial for these positive outcomes. To the degree that a dad plays sole breadwinner, one of dad's contributions is, one of the other contributions that dads have besides the coaching is boundary enforcement. And let me explain what I mean by that. Moms are very much more likely than dads to say, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. Dads are almost as likely as moms to say that too. The difference between dads and moms is that when the child, who's always will set the boundaries with either the father, test the boundaries with either the father or the mother, the mom is much more likely to say, I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. So the child has just told me it had a few more peas, but it didn't finish all the peas. And so I'll let the child have the ice cream without finishing the peas, because after all, he did try hard, or she tried hard. The father looks at the child and says, excuse me, we had a deal here. The deal was, you finish the peas, then you can have the ice cream. You don't finish, you can choose not to finish the peas, but don't even look at me for the ice cream. And the child goes, you are so mean, Mom lets me have the peas. That's fine, that's the rules of Mom's house. By the way, if you continue crying, there'll be no ice cream tomorrow night either. So the child learns from the father that if I continue whining and complaining, I'm not going to be a winner. I'm going to be a loser. The child learns from the mother that I can almost always manipulate a better deal. The child knows that the mom's going to be pretty exhausted, and it's all it has to do is exhaust the mom a little bit more, and the mom will be saying to herself, I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. The child's got a good point about how sensitive, and I want to be sensitive to his or her needs, but the child then learns, is twice as likely when raised by a mom to be ADHD as she is or he is to be ADHD when raised by a dad. And one of the reasons for that is the child is learning to focus on doing what it has to do, finish the peas, in order to get the ice cream, and is therefore learning postponed gratification. Postponed gratification is a key to being able to succeed in life. Those are a few just brief examples of the way fathers contribute that almost no father articulates to anybody. And unless we know that, we can't expect people to respect us. And that's what we have to get out there, not just with the importance of fathers, but people have to know not just why dads are important. They have to know that they're important and for the reasons that are important, and what we do is helpful. To conclude, the father's catch-22 is that dads learn to love their family by being away from the love of their family, by being at work. But the more successful we become at work, the less successful we tend to be in love. Good attorneys tend to find fault. Good husbands tend to find appreciation. The Pew Research data shows that more than half of dads are saying, I'd prefer to be home rather than to be with my children. These are full-time working dads that are surveyed. First time in history that question was asked of dads in that way. In the past, mothers learned to row the family boat from the right side, raise children. Fathers only from the left side, raise money. Today, mothers can row from both sides, but fathers still get the most respect only when they row only from the left, raising money. The problem, if a mom wants or needs to row from the left side of the boat, and a dad could only row from the left, the boat goes in circles. In the future, advanced technologies are going to make it clear that economic change is the only constant, increasing the need for a family boat that has flexibility. With our sons eventually able to raise children as comfortably as our daughters are now raising money. In the future, we don't need a women's movement blaming men, nor do we need a men's movement blaming women. We need a gender transition movement helping both sexes go from the rigid roles of the past to more flexible roles for our future. We need to do for our sons what we've done for our daughters, so our daughters will have men who are worthy of their love. Thanks.